Setting up a simple HTTP server. Hello everybody, Ben Finkel here, and in this nugget, we're going to cover one of the most popular and common use cases for Python, and that's to set up a simple HTTP server using the programmatic nature, the script-like nature of the Python language. It's real easy to do. For the first decade or so of its existence, the World Wide Web was a pretty simple communications network. It didn't do anything much other than serving up static HTML files to users upon request. And although we refer oftentimes to HTML as a programming language, it's really nothing more than text files that are just written up describing how to display some text and some images on the user's screen. Now this was fine, but as time passed, we began to expect more and more out of our websites. And as we moved off of our desktops onto our laptops, our netbooks, even our phones and our tablet devices, we have grown to expect web pages to be really fully developed, dynamic applications. And that's where JavaScript and CSS come in. And those three things combined have really come to define the modern web, which is this highly interactive programmatic experience. And although these three technologies, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, are client-side technologies, the impact of this change has been felt back on the server side as well. After all, we can no longer just serve up HTML pages. We now need to do things like make database calls to pull up data to serve down to the user. We have to authenticate user requests. We've got to make sure that data that we're sending to them, we're allowed to send to that person. We have to dynamically build our HTML, our JavaScript, and our CSS based on the parameters that the user has sent up to us. So doing all this has really forced us to adopt a sort of programming methodology, a programming mindset for developing our back-end HTTP servers. And you probably saw this coming. Python happens to be a great technology for doing that, for building these back-end servers. Its open source programmatic nature means we can build really quick, easy to implement, lightweight server technology for serving up dynamic web pages. Now, just to make sure we're clear, we're not talking about the old school traditional definition of the word server when we say servers. Those are, a big box, a computer, maybe a blade sitting inside of a rack in a data center somewhere. That's not what we mean. What we're talking about is server software, things like web servers, FTP servers, maybe custom servers of that nature. A web server is a piece of software. It might run on one of those old school traditional servers, or it might run on your desktop. It might run on anywhere, actually. And it's called a server because it's responding to user requests. Users make a request, and the server hears that request and responds and provides an answer back down to the user. It serves up responses to the user. In our case, it's going to serve up web pages. There's a lot of different options available out there for servers. Some of the more famous ones that are out there are things like Microsoft's IIS that ships with Windows. Well, guess what? Configuring IIS is actually difficult. You got to deal with all these different little dialog boxes. It's a real pain in the butt. Or one of the more popular ones is Apache. That runs on Linux a lot. But it's the same kind of thing. You've got to configure these .conf files, which are a little easier than all the various dialogues in IIS, but it's still, you've got .conf files scattered around your system. And if something's not working right or not set up right the way you want it to be, then you've got to navigate through all these conf files and find out what exactly is wrong and why it's wrong. So one of the great things about code-based servers, like a Python server, is that everything's in your code file, in this case .py. So you go right to that file in order to see how your server is set up and configured. And if you want to adjust the way it's configured, you simply adjust that code file, restart your Python program, and you've got a new server up and running with your new configuration settings. It's very easy and simple and straightforward to configure and set up, as we'll see right now. We're going to go ahead and use something called the simple HTTP server that's built into Python. Starting a Python server is one of the easiest things you can do in Python. You simply drop to the command line and type python-m simple HTTP server. You don't have to install or download this library. It's default installed. It ships with Python 2.x. If you're on Python 3.0, the command is server.http, or the library is server.http, but by and large you start it the same. It's very easy to do. When you execute this command, all you get is a little note indicating that you are running and you're serving on port 8000. That's the default port on the local host. So you can see this in action by simply launching your browser and browsing to localhost 8000. And what comes back is a directory listing, specifically a directory listing for the directory that I am in. This is the directory that I started the server in. So it's serving up the files that are inside of the directory that I'm already in. So, alright, great, but I don't want to see a directory listing. I want to see some web pages. Well, let's go ahead and build some. First, I'm going to keyboard interrupt, shut down my server here. Then I'm going to bring up an index.html page that I'd like. This looks pretty straightforward. And I'm going to go ahead and save that directly in my folder where I'm serving my HTTP server from, in this case VIRT1. So once I've saved that there, I can restart my web server. And when I refresh my page, my localhost, you can see that now it's serving up index.html. That's the default HTML page. If I wanted to browse directly to it, I could go index.html. And it's going to do the same thing. It's going to bring up this page that I built. And I can see all of those responses down here in the diagnostic output. You can see down here that it's bringing up, it's indicating my requests, what I got, and it's indicating my response code, 200, 200, etc. If I tried to open up a page that didn't exist, let's say another page.html, you can see that I got, in this case, it returned in the diagnostic output an error 404, page not found. And if I want to, I can load up as many web pages and sites in there as I'd like. Let's say I have another page, call it pagex.html. Alright, I'm going to serve up pagex from my site, so I'll just come here. And just like any other website, I can browse to that page and see it loaded inside of my browser on my localhost port 8000. So simple HTTP server allows you to get very quickly a simple, straightforward HTTP server up and running on your computer inside of whatever folder that you're running in. That's really nice, but it's not what we talked about earlier off the top of this nugget. We talked about wanting to make a cool, dynamic, programmatic website. And that's going to take something a little more involved than simple HTTP server. In order to create that dynamic, flexible, cool, powerful website that we talked about, we're going to need a web framework library installed in Python. We can't just rely on a basic page serving server. We need something a little more robust. And if I go ahead and take a look at PyPI, the Python package index, do a search on web framework, I'm going to get, oops, misspelled it. I'm going to get a lot of responses back. As you might have guessed, this is a popular topic, especially in Python. So the results for web framework inside of PyPI are pretty gigantic. You can see the list here a little bit as I'm scrolling down through the screen. So maybe that's not a useful way to do it. You got to do some research on your end, find out exactly what packages are available out there, what's going to suit your needs. There are a lot of different options. There's things like WebApp2, Django, PyWeb, I think one of them is called. But the one that I like and that I want to kind of demonstrate and show off is something called CherryPy. And I like CherryPy because it is very small, very easy to use, and it's got a built-in not only web server, the WGSI as it's called, but also the web framework. So it's kind of combined into one. And you can check it out at cherrypy.org. It's in the Python package index. So let's go ahead and install it now and see it in action. I'm just going to call pip install CherryPy and let pip do its work installing this library for me. It's very quick. Now it's installed. Now I need a basic CherryPy page. So here's a sample CherryPy page. It's stripped right from the main page of that website that I just brought up a second ago. And it's very simple to use CherryPy. All we do is, of course, off the top, we import our library, make sure we've got it. And then we call our quick start passing in this new class, this Hello World class. And the class defines our server responses, basically our routes. In this case, it's the Hello World class. And we only define one route, index, which returns the text Hello World. And we indicate that that index is exposed. We set that equal to true. So that's really all I need to do. When I run this, all I'm going to do is Python cherry1.py. And you can go ahead and see that the cherrypy.quickstart command has the whole server up and running, and I can check out some of the log output here. Notice that it's running on localhost, in this case port 8080. That's the default port that CherryPy uses. So if I open up my web browser and I go to localhost, this time 8080, I get back hello world. So CherryPy is very easily, very programmatically routing my routes into my web browser. If I want to get more complicated than that, well, it's very easy to do too. To add multiple routes with CherryPy, I simply add another definition on my class. In this case, I'm going to use pagex again, and that's going to return a different result. I'll restart up my server here, bring up my browser, And when I navigate to page X, you can see that now I get returned the PageX route, or the results from the PageX class that I defined. So again, CherryPy makes it very easy and simple to set up a small web server that also handles some routing capabilities, as well as a lot of other capabilities. If you check out the CherryPy documentation, you'll find some really great tutorials on how to use CherryPy, how to route different URLs, use static URLs, cookies, sessions, etc. Everything you need to know to build a really robust web server inside of Python, you're going to find right here in the CherryPy docs. And that concludes this nugget on setting up a simple HTTP server. As we saw, it's real quick and fast to get Python set up and running so that you can serve up both static HTML pages as well as dynamic programmatic routes as a web server. Python is a great option both for local development for testing out your websites as well as production implementations. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.